Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us here for another installment of MediaPost webinar series. I'm John Whitfield, SVP of Partnerships here at MediaPost, and we have a great presentation for you all today here from our friends over at Booster. MediaPost webinars bring together the media, marketing, and advertising community to learn more about methodologies and technologies that make effective business possible across a variety of categories. And these are brought to you by top solutions providers, marketers, and practitioners in our industry. As I mentioned, our webinar today is with Booster, and we're thrilled to have with us today Katie Shuley. Katie's the co-founder and chief customer officer at Booster. And Katie's here today to talk to us about strategies that made publisher ads nearly pandemic proof and how to scale them. And I'm very much looking forward to this. This is going to be a lot of fun. Just a reminder, after the presentation, we'll have time for a question and answer session, and you can submit your questions at any time during the presentation here in the question box found on the GoToWebinar interface. So please feel free to do that as we go. And with that, without further ado, let's bring Katie in. Katie, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, John, for the lovely intro.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to have you. Thanks for joining us. And we know you're on the East Coast. It's a little oppressive out there weather-wise, but you have an interesting and fun presentation for us today, despite the heat.
I sure do. So I am Katie Shuley. I'm co-founder and chief customer officer for Booster. That is my title. It is a very good title. There's lots of C's in it, and my family is super proud of me. But what I really do is I run both product and customer success, which means that I work with over 100 publishers across digital, linear, audio, out of home, broadcast. We even have some print in there. And what I do is I try to make a product that helps them with revenue growth and margin improvement. You might be asking yourself, what even is Booster? Booster is the only platform that seamlessly integrates both CRM and OMS to address the unique challenges of media and advertising. And that is essentially what we're doing today. When I wrote this presentation, between that point and today, I have since been to a Nets playoff game at the Barclays Center. So I was planning on really amping up the drama of 2020 and how horrible it was. But honestly, it's starting to feel like longer and longer ago as we enter into vaccine summer. But I'm sure maybe if we try to recall 100 years ago in March of 2020, when we were pausing campaigns, advertisers weren't sure if they should be advertising anymore, and if they did, with what message and where. It was a very confusing and scary time with layoffs and salary cuts and just a lot of uncertainty, which is why it's really astonishing that 94% of publishers report that they had stable revenue by the end of 2020. And in fact, 67% of publishers reported that they got there already by the fall. How on earth did they do this? Where did it come from? And whenever anything cool happens, I just want to know, how can we learn from it? And that's essentially what we're doing today. I'm a very pragmatic person. Everybody loves threes, so we're going to go with it and do a little 3x3 format where we're going to cover 3 key findings from our MAST report, 3 best practices to scale those trends, and then 3 tactical actions to get started trying to find additional revenue growth in 2021. A few notes about the MAST report, which stands for Media Ad Sales Trend Report, that Booster issued earlier this year. This is the first time we have done this report, but it's fantastic and we're going to keep going with it. What we did was we took data from Booster starting in January of 2019 and going through December 2020, so we can compare year over year. And we had to normalize the data a little bit. Primarily came from US-based digital publishers. And we supplemented that with a survey that we sent out to 200 executives in media across sales, operations, marketing, and finance. We put that data together and put it into this report, which is available for download. And I highly encourage you to have a nice iced coffee, drink it, and read this. And I do want to shout out Rashida Boyd, who was the brains behind this and really pushed us to do it. This is her work, and it's fantastic. This presentation is a combination of that report plus the benefit that I have of being able to talk to over 100 publishers and finding what the best practices are, what are they actually doing in practice that we can copy. And I would argue, I'm a little biased, but I think that we have the best clients, the most forward-thinking and solution-oriented clients are on Booster, and what they do is pretty incredible. We are dissecting revenue growth. As you know, revenue solves all problems. Life is just so much easier when you're sitting here like the top 25% in our study at 26% revenue growth. And I did want to show this for a little context. This is the framework of the study where we have broken out the results of the study into the top 25%, the bottom performers, and then the median, just to show the differential so that you can see the spread between the two, really. The only thing I want to point out is we are going to be focusing on the best practices to copy from the 25%, and we're essentially going to be ignoring the bottom performers because most of the bottom performers was driven by unique COVID pandemic circumstances, so there's not much to learn there. Let's dive into the findings. If we look at advertiser and brand spend by category, I'm actually really surprised by this data because it felt like a terribly tumultuous year. I was expecting things to be all over the place, but aside from a 3% decrease in travel, which, like, of course, and about a 4% increase in government spend driven by the election, and tech and telco, which I would also expect, we really didn't see that much change. And even when we looked at the growth within each category, services drove year-over-year growth in the first half and government in the second half, but there's just still not a lot of movement. I would have expected to see orange and gray all over the place, and we really just don't. So if you're a publisher and you're trying to find additional revenue and there's just not that much change in the spend, where do you go? And what I saw this year were some truly savvy publishers who went down a level into their data and operations in order to find that growth. So what I mean is they assume that the top level category is just going to be the industry defined category, but they made the subcategory something that aligned to their value proposition, their audience, their engagement, and then played that against the brand needs. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about, a simple example is the category is CPG that we all know. The subcategory is sneakers, which would apply to some publishers, but not others. There's, of course, science to this, but there's also some art, which I really appreciate and feel like we all need in our lives. So the clients I worked with, they started with what they thought should be true. So statements like, these brands should want to work with us, and they should want to be near our content. They want to be exposed to our audience. And this is where our value proposition is strong and where we can achieve the brand's objectives. And they sort of made a short list there. That's when they then applied the data and operations on top of that. So they made the short list of target categories. And I can't stress, if I had said this again, target would be all capital letters, not peanut buttering, right? Where you're like trying to spread around and you miss the corners of the bread, but the short list of where can we have an impact. And then they adjusted their systems to analyze the past spend and the current pipeline for that targeted list. Then they aligned their sales team to those subcategories, and then they aligned the go-to-market to support the sales team. And they've been managing their business that way ever since. If we look at the deals themselves, there's some stats here that are very interesting. The number of total deals decreased by 3%, but the average deal size went up by 4%. That's total at the aggregate level. If we look at the top performers, they actually grew their deal count 19% and their average deal size by 23%. So while the aggregate was compensating for less deals with size, the top performers were able to optimize both. And how they did this was simply by putting more products on the deal. 50% of deals, or nearly 50% of deals from top performers, had multiple products compared to only 12% from the bottom performers. You might be saying to yourself, it could be because the bottom performers are smaller and they just had less products to sell. But we know, looking across, that the average number of products for in the data was about 51 to 79, and we define a product as a unique placement or sponsorship. So the finding here is that assume everybody has multiple products to sell, and the ones that won in terms of revenue growth were the ones that were able to get a good mix onto that plan. So does that mean just diversify your products and go pitch what's in the bag? In terms of the best practice, it is true that 56% of publishers want to sell more video in 2021. In fact, if you look at this chart, everybody is looking to expand their product mix, and we're seeing a lot of the overlap in the same areas. I can't see you, but raise your hand spiritually if you have said the word podcast this week. I feel like that's all over the place. That's what everybody is talking about. It's second to video. And when everybody wants to be doing similar things, what we can expect to see is either consolidation or saturation, which is eventually going to drive down prices. So the best practice here, if you want to change up your product mix and scale it, is going to be in the profitability of the products. It's not going to be enough to diversify. You're going to need to set up your data to be able to determine which products are actually profitable at any given point in time. We thought we were doing a very good job on being able to show margins and profitability because we had net forecast and margins on the deal and cost itemization, but we've really been pushed in the last year or so by some of our clients who, I wanted to call them like margin queens, but maybe that's not good. I'll call them margin fanatics, who have really pushed us to make room for every persona, which is using a SAS term, or every role, to have visibility to their contribution to margins from the time something is a lead to the time that you're billing from it. So hard costs on a plan by line, estimated costs, margin by product, margin for each deal, margin by channel, and what does sales need to see and understand their role in operations, production, finance, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody needs to play a role in this, and playing a role means having visibility and also having input to it. There's an actual great quote in the study that I'm going to paraphrase, but what I took away from it was like, we all know what we need to do. We gotta get our product mix, focus on new products, but we can't just sell what's in the bag. We need to align to client objectives and ultimately capture wallet share, which leads to the third finding of retention, which is my favorite topic. There's a 50% correlation between revenue retention and revenue growth, which means that those publishers who keep their customers are more likely to grow revenue overall. So what this is saying is that the skill set and mindset it takes to keep revenue is transferable to getting new revenue. And I feel like every time I show a correlation slide, there's just something in us that's like, yeah, that seems obvious. But I don't think it seems that obvious. I think there's a lot of there because if we look at what the report found, it was that the top performers saw an individual or advertiser retention rate of 43%, and the bottom performers were at 26%. So there's not a huge spread there, and there's not a real big difference between the top and the bottom. I run a SaaS business, so all I think about all day is honestly retention, client retention, net recurring revenue. So I am projecting a little bit. But if I landed at a publisher's business tomorrow, at your business tomorrow, and your CEO said to me, Katie, find me additional revenue growth, I can tell you that the first thing I would do would be to focus on retention and adopt a SaaS mindset, even in advertising at a publisher. And I know it's not the same model, it's not a yearly contract, and it's not the same pricing model, but what I would do is borrow some of the principles. Laser focus on churn rate by different time periods, who stopped, who increased, who decreased. I would look at customer success. How easy was it to buy? Would they buy it again? Did it work? All of the stuff that would lead me to cracking higher than 43% individual retention rate. 73% of publishers said that they were satisfied or very satisfied with their retention rate. And this might be controversial, but at 43%, I would be in the 27% that would not be satisfied with that retention rate. And I would pick my target subcategories like we talked about, and I would give out an NRR goal, and I would get started right away on trying to find new revenue just by focusing on the clients who have already spent with us in the past. And in fact, that's what we want to do now, is shift to the final three, which is the three things you can start doing today to put these best practices in place. There are, of course, many things that you can do, but I have a personal commitment to making sure that what I tell you is tactical and achievable, because one of my pet peeves is when I go and do research and look for something and I get a fluffy answer, like when I was in my 20s and I clicked on an article that was going to tell me how to retire with 10 million in the bank, and it told me to do research and make a good plan. And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm doing. So the following three things, they're right here on the page, I'll go into them in detail, are stuff that you could do literally after this call or starting tomorrow. And the first thing is benchmark yourself against the benchmarks that came out of the study. Revenue growth and cycle time at 2 months, pretty standard. 26% revenue growth, I think, is spectacular. What you would need to do for deal count and average deal size and share of deals containing multiple products, these are represented as percentages because every business is different, and top performance comes in all sizes. So there's no like average deal size of $60,000. What you need to do is just, what is your deal size today? What was it a year ago, a quarter ago? Choose your time frames and then show the percentage change and compare yourself to, these are the top performing benchmarks that came out of the study. And the same thing around advertiser retention, so at the account level and then at the revenue retention level as well. The second thing to do is to set up dashboards with leading indicators. If you know me, you know that leading indicators are my favorite thing. I would like my tombstone maybe to say something like, she lived and died by leading indicators, because I am a control freak, and I'm sure many of you are as well, and it is hard to control revenue, but you have a shot at adjusting the indicators that will lead to revenue growth or not. So many of the things that we suggested you benchmark, like the deal size, new deals, win rate, cycle time, number of products, all of that. you should be setting up in a dashboard that you can look at. But the most important thing is that you can filter that dashboard by product and category so that you can align with the best practices we just talked about. If you're going to change up your product mix and you're going to define the subcategories that achieve advertisers' objectives for what it is that you're selling, you need to be able to see line of sight into what's working and what's not working, or what you have to work with. And the third thing is to set up revenue and account retention dashboard, report, and goals that you can work with. You should be able to see this very easily, and you can build from here, but at a foundational level, very specifically, you should be able to get a report where you have either the advertiser or the brand name, depending on how you look at things, and the category, subcategory, how much they spent 1 year versus the next year, and then a little formula that tells you if that was retained or churned, and then the difference in that spend. So even if you did retain the advertiser, did the spend go up or down? Because you're going to need to focus on that as well. When I set out to write this presentation, I set myself some objectives that this would be a good short use of your time, that it would give you a few things to think about, maybe even debate, and a few things to actually do. I hope I have achieved those objectives for you. I do believe that we have time for questions, and I hope I'm able to answer them well.
Yes, Katie, that was great. Thank you so much. So actually, let's start with we have some questions that are coming in from the audience, which is great. But I want to start with one thing that I'm sure can touch on. What's a good retention rate for publishers to shoot for if they want to think like a SaaS company?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't get paid my bonus if our retention rate was under 90%. But like I said, we are a different model, and there's a large gap between 43 and 90. But I would set a goal to beat the top performers of 50% to start there, and go from there.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. Well, so another from the audience here, what, if any, impact do you think that lack of cookies would have on publishers given your suggestions? Any best practices you recommend?
Yeah, the lack of cookies was not something that came out in the study, but I think that the what you can link it to is the points around achieving customer objectives, the brand's objectives. Contextual advertising is not new. It's not going away, and understanding what you have in your portfolio that achieves objectives and you can align to is where I see the benefit going.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, here's one. What would you consider to be a must-have technology to be able to properly monitor categories and profitability?
Yeah. Well, I would consider Booster to be a must-have technology, but really it's setting up your systems and your CRM so that your data is clean and you can believe it and trust it. And that is the data set you have, that you are tagging and categorizing things correctly for the analysis that you want, that your sales team is using the system properly so you can trust things like cycle time, and it wasn't just lack of use of the system, but your data reflects what is actually happening. And then when you start to get into profitability, it goes beyond the sales team. So you need to make sure that your systems that you are using for delivery and reconciliation tie back to the same data you have in your CRM.
Yeah, so great. I mean, that's perfect. And someone in the audience asks, this is interesting, if a publisher wants to test a new product offering, say like an NFT, for example, how do you recommend they approach that?
This much like the suggestions that you can take immediately, if you have those things set up and you want to test a new product, you can look at the leading indicators around that product. Are you growing pipeline? Do you have new deals? What is the average size when that product is on versus when it's off? And that will tell you how effective it is or it's going to be.
Great. And so how would insights that you mentioned earlier translate to best practices for something like revenue forecasting?
Well, it's a little bit related to, you can only forecast your revenue if you have good data.
Right. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Good answer. Rena from the audience asks, for your clients that sell multiple products and platforms, are the sales teams typically siloed as specialists or are they integrated?
Oh, that's interesting. We're actually seeing more and more specialization as clients and publishers are trying to bring new things to market and do that testing to see what works. They want the freedom and ability to say, Katie, you're going to be a new specialist in this product, and we're only going to give you credit for that particular product because we really want you out there driving it. Before, I think we would just see more rollout, put everything on the cart in everybody's bag and send them out to sell it, and we're seeing a lot more nuance now.
Yeah, no, that's right, and it's just an interesting thing as we go. I love the fact that this was tailored around pre-pandemic and then pandemic experiences. So it resonates, right? I mean, what's just a sort of a kind of a wrap things up here? What's your prediction over the next 3 to 6 months as publishers continue, get back to what we were calling more normal conditions? I mean, what do you see is the challenges and the opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be what we saw here with all publishers trying to expand their product mix. Everybody's looking at video. Podcast is very hot, and understanding what is the right product mix and then adjusting the go-to-market around that.
Yeah, and here's an interesting question from the audience. Someone says, related to this, I would think, do you see sales leadership rewarding their sellers strictly on revenue, or are they also taking profitability into consideration?
I love this question. I've seen all kinds, and I can tell you my point of view, which is, I think the most interesting is when we see publishers who are taking profitability into consideration, because it gives leadership and management sort of more levers and things to manage. I think the thought is that salespeople don't want to be paid on margins because there's some of it that is out of their control, and that is a fair point. But I also think there's a lot to be said for having everybody play for the front of the jersey, as we say at Booster, which is everybody's aligned around the same goal. And if the business has decided this is where we need to see our margins from, and this is the level that we need, it's good to have everybody marching to the same objective.
Well, that's fantastic, and I want to remind people, we're going to wrap here, but I want to remind people that everyone will receive a copy of the presentation. Just look for that in your inboxes tomorrow morning, because we're getting some questions asking about that. So definitely look for that. And if you asked a question and didn't get answered, don't fret. We've got Katie and the Booster team here have received your questions and can respond to you directly once we wrap today. Any words of wisdom before we let you off the hook, Katie?
I'm tapped out of wisdom. I put it all in the presentation. I guess just help yourself to the report. I hope you enjoy it.
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time for us today. It's fantastic. We had a great group here, and just want to thank you and also the Rashida and the team behind Booster who helped put all this together. We hope you all found this the presentation helpful and informative. And stay tuned to MediaPost's website and our digital publications in your inbox for more informative webinars just like this one from our valuable partners as we go here. Thanks so much to you, Katie, again. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, John.
And, yeah, and we'll see you out there. Thanks again, everybody. Stay safe out there, and hope to see you all in person at MediaPost events and just at industry functions in general. Thanks again to Booster and the team, and you guys stay safe. Bye-bye.